Hello, everyone. Welcome. So excited for you to be here. We're going to get started here in a second. Welcome, everyone. Excited to see all of you, seeing some familiar names, some unfamiliar names. Excited to have you all here with us. Welcome to From Flip Charts to Breakouts. We're excited to have you for this webinar where we're reimagining in-person engagement for virtual delivery. We first presented on this similar topic maybe about 5 years ago. You might remember that, but this is all updated, brand new. So I'm Tim Waxenfelder. Welcome, everyone. I'm not your host for today, but or maybe I'm your host, but not your presenter. Your presenter today will be coming soon. I want to talk to you about a couple of other things we have coming here. We present this webinar on behalf of Endurance Learning. We are a full service training development company. Since 2015, we've worked with organizations all around the world to help them build training that changes the way their organizations function. We work with all sorts of organizations, e-learning, classroom training, designing instructor-led training, designing virtual training. And so, if while the webinars are an important part of what we do, they are very little of what we do on a daily basis. We focus on supporting organizations like yours in their training needs, and it can be from a very small engagement to very large. So please reach out. You can use the QR code to connect with us on LinkedIn. If you're already following us on LinkedIn, maybe we can start by using the reaction function where you maybe give me a heart or give me a what do we have there? You could give me a thumbs up if you follow us on LinkedIn. We appreciate that. We appreciate all the love. So uh, stick around with us till the end of today's webinar. If you've been here before, you know that we do some free giveaways. So we have either one of Brian's books will be shipped out to you or access to one of our amazing online courses, Foundations of Learning and Development or Training Delivery Basics. They're wonderful courses that give you a self-paced way to go through and learn skills that advance your career. So those are offered as free. If you're interested in purchasing those for your organization, let us know. So stick around to the end. A little bit more on our services. I told you already that we do a lot of custom work for organizations, but we also have offerings that are similar to these webinars, but are deeper and would qualify more as training. And so sometimes there are 90-minute or 2-hour sessions online. They're customized versions for your organization to really go deeper. A lot of times Brian delivers these as lunch and learns. And so you might pull some people together. There are affordable ways to continue the learning for your organization. There might be training skills, there might be design skills. We have a lot of different offerings. So reach out to us and let us know. It doesn't have to be something that's on our website already. We've delivered on so many topics we can customize for your organization. We also have another webinar coming up next month. I think maybe Brian will know when he comes on, but I think maybe we're heading into a year and a half of these webinars. So we're excited to do leaning into nostalgia to create effective learning activities. So this is really tapping into the emotional connections that things from our childhood, from growing up or from our cultures have on us when we go through a learning experience. So I encourage you to sign up for that. You can use the QR code or go to the link that Rachel put into the chat. I would also encourage you, I think we have a LinkedIn poll set up. We've been doing this every month, getting some really creative ideas. You'll also see when you register, there's a question in the email you get from Brian. Feel free to email us back because we use that for the webinars and help shape them to be better for you. Okay, so let's get to today's topic. I want to introduce Brian Washburn. Most of you know him. Brian and I co-founded Endurance Learning 11 years ago and have been working together. We've known each other for many more years than that. And he's been in this field, he'll tell you 20 years, but he stopped counting He's been in the instructional design for over 25 years in all different roles, supporting all sorts of different organizations. As you know, he's published two full-length books through ATD Press. And I've been giving a fun fact about Brian, and today's fun fact is going to relate a little bit to the presentation today. Brian's magic instructor, yes, Brian's magic instructor worked at Men's Warehouse when he was his magic instructor. So that's the fun fact. Now it's time for Brian to take over and show you today why that is relevant.
Hello, everyone, and greetings from Seattle, Washington, where it is about 64 degrees, and I'm kind of debating whether or not I need to put a sweatshirt on for today. So, Seattle is gray and rainy for probably 9 months out of the year, but summer is the best time to be here, and I'm really excited to be here with this webinar and with you all. So thank you all for giving us an hour of your time today to talk about going from in-person to virtual activities. And we'll get into those. We'll get into the magic that Tim talked about in a little bit. But before we do that, what I want to do is I want to just kind of give a quick shout out to some organizations. There are some organizations that have registered for today's webinar where there's at least three, oftentimes more, people from the same organization that have decided to attend today's webinar together. And so those organizations include HCA Healthcare, Assisted Living Alberta, the Association of Christian Schools International, Sunbeam Family Services, and then we have McCormick Institute for Early Childhood, Public Health Management Corporation, DCCCA, Day Reporting Center, and finally Prevent Childhood. It's not prevent, I think it's Prevent Child Abuse America. I don't think we want to prevent childhood America. I apologize for getting that name wrong on the slide. Of course, as we go forward here, we're going to do an experiment in just a second, but one of the things about this webinar, these webinars, they happen monthly, they're free. If you find them useful and you think that other people at your organization would find them useful as well, go ahead and grab them, put them, get together in a conference room or whatever you might do, just in order to spread the word. We're always looking to expand the way that we can reach people because with endurance learning, our vision is that every presentation, every learning opportunity will be engaging and will lead to change. So with today, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and just kind of go to the full screen version here. As we think of this idea of going from in-person to virtual, there's kind of this weird dynamic where when we're in person, we have the ability to kind of feel the energy in the room. If there are materials that we're using, we can touch those materials. When we're working with people, we can just kind of talk to people face to face, right? There's all these things that we're able to do when we're in person, but then when we go online, we lose some of that. And so, as you can see with this handkerchief that I just had, basically, when we go from in person to virtual, we lose the ability to touch things, and then we're left with nothing at all. And so today's webinar is really about trying to figure out how do we at least bring a little bit of that in-person feeling and intent back to what we're trying to do with our activities. And eventually, we may not be able to touch stuff, but we'll be able to try to figure out how do we kind of give a very similar, we don't have the full handkerchief, but how do we give a similar impact to our learners? Now, when I do that trick in person, and I saw a few kind of ooh faces with reactions, but when I do something like that in person, it definitely gets a reaction. I can feel the reaction from my learners. But when I do that virtually, I don't know really what's going on. I don't know if people are doing emails and like what is he? Why does he have that? Where did that handkerchief go? Right. So when we're virtual, I kind of need to maybe switch the activity around a little bit. And there's some different things that I could do. I'm going to bring my slides back up, and if I can find my share button here, I'm going to bring my slides back up, and let's try an alternative to what I just did. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everyone here if you could grab a piece of paper, the back of an envelope, a sticky note, whatever it is, and something to write with. I'm going to try to convert what I just did with that handkerchief to something that might be a little bit better virtual. And so go ahead and I'm going to give you a moment to grab a piece of paper and something to write with as I set my screen back up after doing stopping the sharing, and now my screen is all messed up. So here we are. All right, so hopefully you have a piece of paper, you have something to write with, and I do too. So I'm going to just use this note card. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just write something down on this note card. It's going to be a prediction of how this activity is going to turn out. So let me write something down on this note card. Let me write it nice and big and bold. Eventually, I'm going to show you what I wrote, but not quite yet. Let me write this down. And then I'm stalling so that more people can get a piece of paper and something to write with. I'm going to put this prediction, I'm going to fold it up. I'm going to put it into my envelope here. I'm going to fold this envelope up. I'm going to have this envelope right here. Don't lose sight of this because I'm going to have it right here. I'm not going to change anything here. But what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of math. And so if you need to open up the calculator app on your phone or open up the calculator on your computer, that might help you to do this. If you have the ability to do mental math, feel free to do that. I would prefer a calculator myself, but I'm just going to ask you to do a few things. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do on that piece of paper is write down any three-digit number, as long as the first and last digits aren't the same. So for me, for example, I'm going to write down a three-digit number that's 813. Maybe you're going to pick 123 or 479 or whatever it is, right? So pick your number, any three-digit number, okay? And then what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to reverse the order of your digits. So for me, I had 813. I'm going to just flip that. And so I'm going to make it 318, right? So I'm reversing those digits. Easy enough so far. Now we're going to start to get into some math. So let me ask you to subtract the smaller number from the larger number. For me, it's 813 minus 318. And my answer is 495. You're going to have a different answer unless you chose the same numbers that I have. So I'm going to give you a moment to go ahead and do that. Do not be embarrassed to use your calculator app. All right. I'm going to try to make sure that people have enough time, but I also need to kind of move through this because we have some content we want to get to too. All right. So you have a new number. Let's take that new number that you have. My number is 495. You probably have something different. And reverse those digits. All right. So I had 495. I reverse those and I get 594. And the last thing I'm going to ask you to do is to add these two numbers together. Okay, so I'm going to add 495 plus 594. Don't give me your number yet. I just want if you could, just give me a thumbs up that you've finished, right? So you have finished. You have a sum here. I see some hands raised. I see lots of thumbs up. All right. Now, here's kind of the fun part of this because we're going to actually put a poll up. So we're going to put a first poll up, and it's basically a yes or no question. Uh, is this the number that you had? Is 1089 the number that you had? Uh-oh. I'm seeing lots of yeses, but I'm seeing some no's here as well. Hmm. All right. Well, this was my attempt at magic, and maybe this is what I get for hiring a magic tutor that that worked at Men's Warehouse and maybe not a magic, but he actually did work in a magic shop too. I'm out of predictions, right? So I have given you my predictions. This envelope is empty. Um, hmm. My magic instructor taught me that if things don't quite work out well, the the kind of a magician's tool is just to snap and see what else we can come up with here. For those people that said no, was that your number? Was it 198? I don't even know where that number came from, but it happened to be in this. And so this is what happens with this particular issue is that sometimes the number is 1089, sometimes it's 198. It really depends. And like all good magicians, I can't really reveal my tricks, but I do want to kind of make the point that when we're doing something when it's in person, we can touch things and feel things, and we can give out props, and we can use props. But when we're virtual, we need to find a different way in order to engage our audience. And so I'm going to actually ask you in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. What do these two little tricks have to do with today's session, from flip charts to breakouts? Go ahead and give me your thoughts there, and I would love to just kind of hear your thoughts in terms of what do these two little tricks have to do with today's session? Engagement, yeah, activity, engagement. People were leaning in. There's this element of mystery that we want to create, and so even when people are in a virtual setting, right, we can't be in the room and feel what's happening. We can still create a sense of wonder and capture our participants' thinking and understanding. I love what Jem wrote. Each person wrote something. So when I'm in person, I can get people's attention by holding a prop, right? My stagecraft, the presence, my physical presence of people. But when we're virtual, we need to find a different way to keep people engaged. And so getting everybody to do something at the same time is one of those things that's really, really helpful. Thinking versus just input. I love the things that people are writing into the comments, and keep those comments coming. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of today's session. So we're going to talk a little bit about why certain activities work, both for in-person and for virtual. We're also going to really kind of talk a little bit less about the mechanics, right? So, and what I mean by this is when it comes to mechanics, can I just take what I did in person and figure out what's the exact same way to do that virtually? That's not what we want to do. What we want to do is figure out what's the intent. What was the intent of that thing that I did in person? And then how do I achieve that same intent virtually? We're going to convert some activities from in-person to virtual. We're going to do a little bit of practice all together, and then you'll have a time to work in small groups. And finally, at the very end, if you stick around, we kind of promoted this as we got some marketing materials out. We have an in-person training activity cookbook, and we have converted a number of those activities to be virtual. And so we're going to give you a link to that virtual activity cookbook at the end of today's session. So that's kind of the ebb and flow. It's what to expect over the course of today. And I'm just going to start out here by talking a little bit about the differences between in-person and virtual. I'm not even going to ask you to put stuff into chat because I think at this point, even before the pandemic, a number of people were doing virtual training. When the pandemic came, we all had to grapple with what's the difference between in-person and virtual, and how do we navigate that? Just to make sure that we're all kind of level set on the same page. With in-person, you have the body language, you have the energy. With virtual, you need to rely on virtual proxies, the thumbs up, the hands up, the chat or polling or things like that, just to make sure that people are with us. With in person, we can rely on physical movement. With virtual, we need to do something that is kind of simulated, and maybe even asking people to grab a piece of paper and something to write with, and to do something with it. But we kind of have to also have faith that people will be able to do that. With in-person, we can have props and materials. With virtual props, what props? I mean, what are we going to do? Some people do send things out in advance, but oftentimes we have to come up with some different ways, some different elements in order to fit to kind of mirror that physical piece to in-person training. Social pressure is ambient when you're in person. It's just kind of floating around the room. There are people there who are kind of looking to you and seeing how you're going to respond. But with virtual, sometimes social pressure is optional, especially when you have your cameras off, or when you go on mute, or when you're choosing not to participate. Side conversations are often organic when you're in person. Virtual, the side chats are oftentimes engineered. Now, sometimes people, the chat can sometimes take on a mind of its own, but oftentimes we need to prompt any sort of conversations that are happening one speaker at a time when you're in person, because we can only listen to one person at a time. But with virtual, you can have multiple speakers at once. You can use the chat or polling or other things like that, where different people can be talking at the same time. With in-person stagecraft, that kind of your presence, and being intentional about all of your movements, using physical proximity to help with some audience control, things like that. That all matters. When we're virtual, there's competition for attention, right? People might be checking their emails right now. People might be checking their social media right now. People might be changing their laundry from the washer to the dryer right now. There's a lot of competition when we're virtually. And in person, it's a controlled environment. Everybody's kind of going through the same thing at the same time. If the room is too hot, it's too hot for everybody. If it's too cold, it's too cold for everybody. But when you're virtual, there's varied environments. Some people are doing this from home. Some people are doing this from an office. Some people are doing it from a coffee shop. So there's lots of different environments that you also have to kind of be aware of. So obviously, those are kind of some of the differences between in-person and virtual. But a big question comes with this idea of what makes an activity actually successful. Not just being aware of what the context is or the modality is, but what actually makes an activity to be successful. And here I'm going to go back to the chat. And when it comes to in-person activities, I would love to hear from you. What makes an in-person, like if we had to break down in-person activities, what actually makes those successful? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to share a little bit of a few of my thoughts and a little bit of research behind what works too. But from your perspective, when you're delivering something in person, what makes it successful? Ashwood said synergy, which is actually a really interesting piece that I'm going to share some research about. 100% participation. So if people are participating, it can be successful. I'm kind of wondering, what do you do in order to get 100% participation? So I'd love to hear some of those thoughts too. Active learning, when you see people that are engaged and get good feedback afterwards. So now we're starting to talk about how do we define success? Are people engaged? Are people doing things? Are people giving you good feedback? Are people actually able to do something new or differently or better? Seeing small groups first. Keep those thoughts coming in. I'm going to share a few thoughts here. When you're in person, something that can make an activity successful is you can physically manipulate materials or simulate tasks. On that photo that you see, yes, that is Play-Doh. We actually used Play-Doh in one of our activities when we were designing for a manufacturing company, and had people recreate things using Play-Doh. So that's something that you can actually do when you're in person. So physically, in person, you can perform tasks. And you can do it in a more authentic manner. If you're training people to do something in person, when you are in person, you can simulate those activities in a more authentic way. Somebody mentioned synergy earlier, and I'm going to share this idea, this concept of mirror neuron activation, which is it's kind of a fancy term. Basically, there's some research behind in-person training or in-person education, really, that talks about students will mentally imitate a facilitator's gestures. In this image, you can see that I am physically looking at a flip chart. So where do you think that all of my participants' eyeballs are going to go versus virtual, right? So you don't know. I'm looking at a camera right now. I don't know what you're looking at, but when we're in person, I can actually be intentional about how I'm moving around the room and get my participants to mentally imitate those gestures as well. Now, when this comes up, the idea of the handkerchief activity that I started this session with, it is more powerful in 3D. There's research behind this idea of mirror neuron activation, where participants or learners kind of mentally mimic the what the facilitator is doing when it changes to a video screen. So the research basically had teachers, instructors, do some things in person, and then kind of tested whether or not their participants were doing those things in person. And then the research also had people watch a video of an instructor doing the exact same thing that they did in person, and the brain readings for people who were watching the video screen were much less correlated with the facilitators' movements and gestures. And so there is physically something that is different about instruction that is in person versus when you're watching it just on a 2D environment on a screen. And the other piece to this, though, when it comes to activities that work when we're in person, sometimes people say, "Oh, in person is just easier, it's better." It's not always better. There's a few different concepts that I want to talk about here. One is social facilitation. It can be good or bad. What do I mean by social facilitation? And there's research behind this that goes back to 1898 that found that like cyclists tended to ride faster when they were in groups than when they were out on their own. There's other research that these early researchers in this concept were looking at that that actually took a look at children who are winding fishing line, and they would do it faster when they're in the presence of other children that were doing the same tasks. So there is this idea of social facilitation or social pressure to perform when you are in a group, and when you're in person, you can kind of physically see that group. Now, there's a flip side to this because there's another concept that it's one of the favorite as I was researching this particular webinar, it's one of my favorite terms that I came across, and that is social loafing. And social loafing, this is not a good thing. Social loafing is research that dates back to the also goes back to the 1890s, but then it was a term that was coined in 1979 by some researchers at the Ohio State University. And the idea here is that individuals can exert less effort on a collective task when working with others than if they were working alone. Basically, the idea here is that when there are groups, and if you've ever worked on a group project, maybe you've seen this in action. Sometimes people are like, no, they're going to handle it. I can sit back, right? And so oftentimes, or sometimes when we're in person, when we're having people work in small groups, you can see this phenomenon of social loafing happen, where in groups, as the groups get larger, people can start to take a step back as other people are stepping up to do all the work. Now, one last interesting note about this idea of social loafing is that many studies show that men are much more likely to socially loaf than are women. In fact, there were some studies that showed that women did not exhibit social loafing at all, which is a whole other webinar that we could talk about in terms of some group dynamics. But so the point here is that in person isn't necessarily always better. We just need to be aware of some of the forces that are at play. Now, when we go to virtual, I'm kind of curious from your experiences. What makes a virtual activity successful? What are some things that you can do virtually where you can feel like, oh, that activity was actually successful? What are some things that you've done? Highly interactive, making connection, using polls, ensuring cameras are on. That's a really interesting one. We're going to talk about some of the different features here, and actually how they can create kind of an equalizing effect. Waterfall answers, polling in breakout rooms. We use breakout rooms here all the time. Kahoot, hands-on activities. All right, so perfect. Keep those answers coming in. I'm going to share a little bit around research. So when it comes to virtual activities, active learning is just better. And so I'm seeing that people are using some of the various features of virtual environments. So when we think of in this statement, active learning is just better. It's not unique to virtual learning, but it's something that we should always keep in mind because sometimes when we're in a virtual space, we'll think, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to show slides. I'm going to talk through things, right? Because that's the easiest thing. That's the most conventional way to do it. Now, when it comes to virtual learning or just being active in active learning, sometimes participants feel, I don't need the activities. I don't need the polls. I don't need the chats. I definitely don't need the breakout rooms. Just tell me what I need to know and let me get on with my day. Now, there have been some studies with people who have carried these attitudes, and one study in particular that took a look at physics students at Harvard University. And the students said that they preferred lecture, so just give me the information. And even those students that went through a course where the professor employed active learning strategies, when those students that went through the active learning strategies kind of variable of the experiment had to respond to a survey, they felt they didn't learn as much. However, when students were actually tested on the material that they learned, lecture versus active learning, the students that went through the active learning, even though they didn't feel they learned as much, actually scored better on the exams. And so sometimes learners, we don't even know what we actually will be more effective for us. And so that is one of the elements here when it comes to just active learning is just better. So if we can make it active, that's great. There's another piece to virtual learning that has been, it's not settled science. I just thought it was kind of interesting. I'm going to mention it just briefly. This idea of the equalization hypothesis. And this is kind of the concept that there is greater equality that can be found in a virtual environment, especially if we have people who have different positional authorities. So when you're in person, sometimes if our boss is in the room, maybe we're not going to speak up as much because we're waiting to see what the boss has to say, and then we'll kind of echo or mirror that, right? But with virtual, there's this hypothesis that virtual can be a little bit more of an equalizer, especially when we use things like polls or other anonymous ways to kind of offer input. Now, that is one kind of hypothesis that's out there. Other studies suggest that more talking may happen virtually, but it doesn't necessarily redistribute who actually dominates the conversation. So if somebody's dominating the conversation in person, or if we're deferring to our supervisor in person, other studies suggest that it doesn't necessarily mean that our boss might not speak as much in a virtual environment, but it's something that's interesting to consider out there. So that's a little bit of the research. I want to get past the research and I want to talk about the practical implications of this, especially if we're going from in-person to virtual. So when we convert from in-person to virtual, there are lots of different ways to do it. It really does boil down to what's the intent behind the activity. And if you remember nothing else from today's webinar, that's the thing that I want you to take away is what is the intent behind my in-person activity? And then what do I need to do in order to really harness not the mechanics of the activity, but the intent? And how do I bring that into a virtual kind of environment? So let me give you an example. If we were doing a training where we're de-escalating an upset customer, maybe the in-person instructions would be something like this. With a partner, discuss some words or phrases you'd never say to an upset customer, share your answers, and I'm going to summarize them on flip chart, right? So there's lots of different ways that we could go about doing this. And there's a few different things that are at play when we do it in person. We just kind of naturally do it, right? So talk about this as a partner, discuss some phrases, then we'll talk about them. Well, virtually, unless we're going to set up breakout rooms, we can't necessarily have people talk with a partner. So we can't necessarily do this one-to-one. It's not a one-to-one conversion. But with virtually, we have to kind of think, what's the intent here? So one way that we could do this, just off the top of my head, instead of having people talk to somebody, just share your thoughts in the chat, right? So that's one way we could do it. If we wanted to, we could also do breakout rooms, right? So we could put people in breakout rooms, talk real quick, come back together, let me get your thoughts. It all depends on the intent. If this is an opening activity, I'd probably just stay with the chat. But if this is something where we're actually looking for some strategies, then that intent is very different than an opening activity. And so I might use the breakout rooms first. And so that's something that we just need to make sure that we're keeping in mind. And we're not just defaulting, well, chat seems to be the easiest or poll seems to be the easiest way. Let's talk about the intent. And in order to think through the intent and kind of match the features with the intent, my colleague Rachel is going to put a handout um, in the chat here. And this handout just kind of talks about being able to match the intent of an activity with the features that you might want to use. And it's a little bit Bloomsy, right? So if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, this is a little kind of like that, but not quite. And so along the top, you see the intent has a continuum from awareness to knowledge to confidence to skill building to performance, right? So that could be a variety of different reasons why we would want to train people. Maybe we just want awareness. And if we're thinking of just awareness, well, then some of those things that we use all the time with virtual settings can really come into play, right? So just do lecture with some slides. We're making people aware. But if we want people to gain confidence, or if we want them to actually build skills, or we want them to improve their performance, then we need to start to explore some different kinds of features there. So with this, and then you can kind of see if a circle is filled in and is dark, that is a perfect fit for that particular intent. If one of the virtual features is kind of a half filled in, then maybe you want to use it, maybe you don't. If it's not filled in at all, that might not be the best way to do something. So if you really want to build a skill, you might need to build a foundation of knowledge somehow. But if you're getting into skill building activities, a lecture isn't going to cut it, right? So that's basically what this kind of offers to share with that. Let me give a few different examples here. So we have another example here, an opening activity during a train the trainer session. Which of the following tells you that your learners get it at the end of a session, right? So this is a typical question that I'll ask at the beginning of a train the trainer session. And then I'll just have people use note cards, different colored note cards. So if you think that eye contact during your presentation tells you the learners get it, use a pink card. A yellow card, if participants nodding their heads as you talk, tells you that they get it. A blue card, if they're responding to, based on something in a case study. Or maybe you think all of these tell you that the learners get it. Let me see. On a count of one, two, three, hold up the note card that you feel is the most appropriate answer here. Let me see it, right? So if this is something that I'm doing virtually, if I have to change this to virtually, my intent, it's an opening activity. I just want to kind of get some thoughts here. Polling. Polling is an easy response to this. Now, what happens if we want to simulate practices, though? Or simulate practicing responses. So kind of a role play. Pairing participants up. This is an in-person activity. Give each pair a note card with common learner pushback moment written on it. Like this doesn't apply to my job, or I already know this. How would you handle those situations? I don't want to just kind of hear your brainstorm thoughts. I want to actually see you say the words. So in this activity, one person's going to play the role of facilitator navigating the challenges. The other person will be the challenging participant, right? And let's maybe talk in small groups or in pairs. And then once you're done, the partners will swap roles. And then me as a facilitator, I'm going to circulate and watch this happen. Now, the intent of this is not awareness. I can't just lecture my way through this. I can't just use polls or even the chat in order to get through this. This is something where I'm going to need to use some of the different features that are available. This is probably a breakout group. However, you can also see that the trainer in person has an opportunity to circulate. So as a facilitator of a virtual session, I might need to make sure that I'm not just designing something as breakout rooms, but I'm intentionally popping into the breakout rooms to hear how things are going. So those are some different ways that I might convert something based on intent. My question now is, how would you change some things based on intent? And you're actually going to get a chance to practice this, discuss this with some colleagues who are here. And so we're going to put a small group activity discussion up here. So we're going to put you into small groups here in just a minute. And let me explain the activity. What we're going to do is we want to convert something from in-person to virtual, and I'm going to share And I can see that actually, Rachel, if you could put the link to this Google Doc in the chat, thank you. So what you're going to see in the chat is a document that looks like this. It's a Google document, and you should be able to access it just by clicking on that link. And what I'm going to ask you to do is pay attention to the room that you're assigned, the breakout room that you're assigned to. And what you're going to do is on the left-hand side of this document, you'll see a series of tabs. And if you're in breakout group 7, you'll click on breakout group 7, right? So each of these tabs looks the exact same. What you're looking at here is a piece of a lesson plan. It gives you a learning outcome or a learning objective. It tells you what materials you'll be using in person, and it gives you the instructions for an in-person activity. And what I want you to do in your small groups is to take a look at this, try to figure out what the intent of this activity is, and how would you redesign this activity for virtual engagement? How would you make this activity successful, converting it from in-person to virtual? So take a look at the instructions here, try to figure out what the intent of this activity is, what features you might use virtually, and then I want you to rewrite this activity if you were to do it virtually. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you about 10 minutes in small groups, and we're going to put you into breakout rooms. If you can't get into a breakout room, don't worry, stay right here. I will facilitate the conversation in the large room. But we're going to put you into small groups, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes to hear some of your thoughts and how you navigated this.
Okay, Brian, people are heading into breakout rooms now,
Yes.
but we should end up with quite a few people left in the
Okay.
main room, which is fine.
All right. So I think we only have we had a pretty good group that were able to get into the breakout rooms. We have about 35 people here. And Tim, are we able to take people off of mute here if they
Yeah, we
were
should be
brief?
able to.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to speak up for some part of it, you can also chat. And we saw that um, in the chat, someone made the observation that some people are just more comfortable in a virtual session chatting. So chatting is fine
Yep.
as you
Either way
respond to
works.
Brian. But if you want to come off mute and ask a question or contribute something, your thoughts on this, just let me know. We'll take, and it'll give you a prompt to unmute yourself. So I can't unmute you, but I can ask you to unmute yourself.
Perfect. And so for this particular activity, we're taking a look at a lesson plan. And the objective here is to come up with strategies to navigate challenging situations and engage challenging participants. And if we were in person, the materials we would be using are scenarios that we placed into an envelope, and have one envelope or one scenario per participant. And so we kind of put these different scenarios. People would get an envelope. You wouldn't know what's inside of it, and then you would kind of pull out the challenge that you have here. So the way this activity works is that so I'm just going to kind of walk through this, and then I'm going to hear some of your thoughts in terms of what's the intent here and how would we change this. So for this activity, first of all, it starts individually, right? So give each person an envelope with the title and description of a challenging participant written on the outside of the envelope. So it might say like the dominant participant or the reluctant participant, right? So something like that would be written on the outside of the envelope. And then there's a series of different kind of scenarios that you might find if you were to open it up. So if you got maybe on the outside of the envelope, it would say highly experienced. And so you open it up and it says, this person is bored, they're resentful, they have to be in your training. How would you handle this type of participant? Or the extrovert who always has something to say about each of your points. Or the participant that has a strong belief that the way they have been or will do things is the one and only way. How would you navigate that? So each person has a unique challenge to them. And then they need to take some time in order to um, think through how would I engage this person. And then, so they would have about 5 minutes to come up with a thought. And then what they would be asked to do is to work with a partner. So share their thoughts, share their strategies with the partner, see if the partner has anything to add, and then flip, right? So if I had the dominant participant, I would say, well, maybe I'd try to make sure that we did a lot more small group work or things like that. And then my partner would say, that's a great idea. Something that's worked for me is this. And then we flip. So my partner would kind of share what they did, and I would share my own perspectives. And then at the very end, we would bring everybody back together and we'd debrief it. We'd ask for some report outs, and then as a facilitator, I'd offer some other things that may be helpful that didn't necessarily come up in the discussion. So this is a little bit complex, right? So it starts from individual, then it goes to pair, and then it goes to large group. I would love to hear if you have some thoughts either in the chat or if you'd like to raise your hand. Thinking of the intent of this is the first of all, is the intent is it awareness? Is it knowledge? Is it skill building? Is it performance? What's the intent, and how might you change this to be done virtually? So if you'd either like to write into the chat or if you'd like to raise your hand, I would love to hear some thoughts.
And I'll add in that we're depending on this group because the groups that got into breakout rooms, they are active and typing things into the document. So we need your help to not look bad when they come back. We want to make sure we have contributions.
The intent, Carol says, the intent in the beginning is to build skill, but it scaffolds the learning. And I think that is really spot on. It's the idea. It goes beyond awareness, right? It goes beyond knowledge, and we're trying to build some skills here in terms of and get people a little bit more confident in terms of being able to handle some of the situations. Now, we're not actually having people kind of role play. How would you actually handle this? So it's still more of a conceptual or theoretical conversation, but we're starting to get into the foundations of the skill. Lauren says, I think it's skill building, and breakout rooms could be a great way to bring to a virtual option. And then when the group comes together, each group could have a representative share out. And that is one of the things that I think is really, really important when we are doing things virtually. The instructions that we use and the instructions that we give are really, really important. When we're in person, we can stop all the groups from talking and say, oh, I forgot to say, make sure that you have somebody who's ready to report out. When we're virtual, we want to make sure that we have given as good of instructions as we can before we set people off into the breakout rooms. And so, if we're going to have people report out, we might need to remind people as we're giving them instructions. When you come back from the breakout rooms, please make sure that you have a representative from your pair that's willing to report out. That's a really good point. Thank you, Lauren. Anybody else want to jump in here? We have about three minutes or so. Tia says, could still have some quiet reflection time for those who need to think before starting the discussion with others. If pre-assigned and breakouts could do well in main room, otherwise have first X minutes in breakout be silent. There's a few different options. One option that I've actually used that kind of borders on what you're suggesting, Tia. I've done activities in virtual sessions before where I've put every single person in their own breakout room for 5 minutes, right? To do something like this, to reflect individually. And then I bring them back together in the large group, and then I'll kind of redo the breakout room so they're paired up. But I've done something like that. And so maybe that's where we want to start here. So keeping in mind the intent is really confidence, maybe some skill building. It's not necessarily performance, right? So we didn't really get into role plays here, but it's confidence and skill building. And I see Anne wrote. I agree with Lauren. It feels much like what we're doing right now. The breakout give folks time to think and talk with just one or a couple other people that allows for sharing of ideas in a less intense setting. Yeah, more personal. I mean, can you imagine if we were to try if I was trying to do this activity right now with all 125 people that joined the webinar, um, we could really get some social loafing. Or maybe we'd get just a flood of thoughts from people, and how do you organize that? And so, making sure that people have a chance just to kind of think and talk concepts through in a small group is really helpful. I can't even read the chat with that many people. Yeah, absolutely. It is funny when the chat gets really active. Sometimes it's too active to the point of distraction, right? I can't keep up. And sometimes when I ask for responses in the chat, I can't scroll, and every time somebody new hits enter, I'm scrolling up, and then it goes back down to the bottom, and so it's really difficult sometimes, and so it's really important sometimes to make sure that we're using the breakout rooms in order to give people a chance to process. I think that maybe step one here could be assign everyone to an individual breakout room for 5 minutes. And then step two would be to pair people in breakout rooms, um, making sure they were aware that one person is going to need to be able to report out. And then step three, depending on group size, either take off mute and share or share thoughts in the chat. I think that might be perhaps the most basic kind of following what this group has been talking about. I'd love to hear any other thoughts that people had when it came to some of the
And Brian,
anything else
I'm
striking.
gonna interrupt
Yep.
you a little bit. We've got about a minute left, so they've gotten a 2 minute warning, and then we're about to give them a 1 minute warning in the breakout. So I'm giving you the same 1 minute warning.
Okay. We have 1 minute. Anybody want to talk fast? Type fast in the chat. Love to hear your thoughts. Carol says if the group isn't too large, you could give everyone secret roles via DM and ask them to improv a discussion as their role and ask the group to guess. That actually, the direct chat, I think, is an underutilized feature of virtual. And I really like that idea because that takes this to a different level, right? Again, it's not a one-to-one conversion, but again, we're going with the intent and the learning objective, and using the features to our benefit as trying to kind of be beholden to the original activity here. I really like that idea, Carol. Challenge we often have is that our platform limits us to 50 breakout rooms and we can have 200 plus. So we usually have to do small groups rather than singles or pairs. Yep. Yeah. So challenges like that are things to navigate around. If working with 200 people, you can't put them in individual breakout rooms, then you just might need 5 minutes of silence or things like that. All right. Sounds like we are going to be joined by everyone else very soon. I'm going to stop sharing this as people come back, and I'll share my big screen here. Looks like we are getting everyone back into our room, which is fantastic. Welcome back. We have a few minutes left. I would love to hear from folks. First of all, Tim, if we could put up the penultimate poll that is in our poll library, I would love to kind of hear and see what people thought when it came to the intent of this activity. If you even discussed that, or maybe you jumped right into some of the things that you might do here. So for this particular activity, I'm seeing that knowledge is a little bit, confidence is a little bit, skill building. And when we were in our group here in the main room, we were very similar. People were saying this seems more skill building. I think there's an argument to be made that this is really kind of confidence first. So can we come up with some answers? And then maybe a little bit of skill building, although we're not necessarily doing any sort of role play in this particular activity. So it's a little bit more conceptual. But yes, we need that foundation of this is what I would do in order to build that skill. So absolutely, I think that there's some good thoughts there. And then kind of another question that I had is. And we can obviously, everybody has access to this document, so you can see what some of the other groups are doing. But I'd love to hear what features were you using when you converted this into from in-person to virtual? What were some of the virtual features that you were using? Now, in our group, as you're answering that, breakout rooms is definitely one of those. But so with ours, and we use chat as well, and I'm seeing that there's a variety, and I'm going to be interested to take a look and see what some of the groups were doing if you had a chance to write some notes. A few quick notes with our group of things that came up that I found really interesting. One is that for that individual portion, when people were given 5 minutes, depending on your group size, what I've done sometimes is I've actually assigned every single person their own breakout room. So they actually have a time on their own to come up with some thinking and some thoughts before they actually get paired up and then pair people up. But, stop that breakout of individuals and then pair people up. The other thing that somebody mentioned was another way to go with this activity could be to send an individual chat to a specific or to everybody and say this is the kind of the role or the personality that you need to kind of play and have each person just kind of share either play that role and have the rest of the people try to guess what that is and how they would handle it. So I think that individual chats is one of those underutilized resources that can be a feature that can take chat to a different level as well. I know that we're running very close to the end of time here. And so I don't want to let you go before we give you a link to our first version and our first draft of the virtual training activity cookbook. Now you'll see it doesn't quite have as many activities as the other cookbooks that we have for the in-person version, but you're going to start to see some virtual versions of the in-person activities that we've used. We're going to continue to work on this particular resource. And then in several months, we're actually going to come back. We're going to have kind of a lesson plan building lab or a competition almost, where you're going to be asked for the first half of the webinar to create something that is going to be in person using the in-person cookbook. And then the second half of that webinar, you'll actually be challenged to take that and translate it into a virtual setting. So we're going to be continuing to work on this virtual training cookbook. Be on the lookout for that. However, that said, that's not next month. Next month, so thank you for today's session. But next month, we have leaning into nostalgia to create effective learning activities. I have a Blockbuster sweatshirt. I had a chance to go on a road trip a few years ago, and we were down in Oregon, and I had stopped for gas, and my kids were like, "What's Blockbuster?" And I was like, "Where do you see that?" And they said, "It's over there." And it was the last Blockbuster on the planet, and so we had to stop into the Blockbuster, and now every time I wear that sweatshirt, somebody somewhere will say something, and it doesn't matter where I am. I could be here in Seattle, I could be in the airport. I've been in Puerto Rico, and people are like, "Oh, have you been? Do you know where that is?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've been there." So this idea of there's something powerful to nostalgia, and if we can harness that and bring it into our learning activities, there's actually research that says this can help people with retention. And so we'll be talking about that next month. I don't want to talk too long because we still have some giveaways to get to. So we would love to have you connect with Endurance Learning. Please do follow us. This is where we share all of our different announcements, different tips, different tricks, and some other things that we do. Tim, I see you.
And I just want to emphasize that when we post about the webinar on LinkedIn, I'm just going to keep asking for this because it's really important to us that you get this out to more people. Forward the message to people when we promote it on our mailing list. Send it on LinkedIn. Give it a thumbs up on LinkedIn. Repost it. For us to be able to do these every month, we need to see a lot of new people registering. It's really important that we have lots of people coming. So please support us in that way by amplifying the message.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing magic tricks. We're offering these free resources. So what's not to like about these webinars? Please do connect with us on LinkedIn as well. As Tim mentioned, these are 1 hour kind of samples of what we do. But if you are looking to bring your organization to the next level, please reach out. We can do it virtually. We do train the trainer in person. So there's lots of other things that we can do. I'm going to say thank you here. We're going to stick around for a little bit. But for those who need to leave, please do leave and go on with the rest of your day. But if you have questions, if you want to have other discussions, we're going to be around to talk a little bit more for anything that whether it's going